should be the best game of the weekend. It looked like it was going to be one of the games of the season. Bengals at the Bills. Bills are favored by 5.5. Now, that Monday night game, the Damar Hamlin game, of course, the Bills were favored by 1. Basically a pick 'em.
On the road.
On the road in Cincinnati. So, the general rule, you give 2.5, 3 points to the home team. This is saying that the market's moved a little bit closer to the Bills than it was just a couple weeks ago, just in week 17, right? The market's moved a little bit closer to the Bills. Both teams coming off of games where they didn't cover, right? They didn't dominate the Dolphins and Ravens, respectively. So it doesn't feel as good, but we still know these are 2 of the 3 best teams in the AFC.
Yeah, although potentially, like if you dial down the impact of home field advantage, which I think is happening for betting lines, certainly now, but for a while, I think that like the line has actually moved like a reasonable chunk. Because, say if it's 1.5.
Toward the Bills?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like 1.5, right? It would have been Cincinnati by a half point last time. And then 1.5. Now it's Buffalo by 4. So it's quite a lot. And it's gone through, significant number in doing that.
I wonder how much of this is just the Bengals offensive line.
I mean, it has to be basically all of it, right? They've lost 3 starters in 3 weeks.
We always talk about how much one player moves the spread, and it's really the quarterback, right? The quarterback has this number attached to them. The best quarterbacks, it's like 7 or 8, right? If you lose Patrick Mahomes and you have to play Chad Henne, you're losing 7 points right off the top before anything else happens. And any non-quarterback can barely move the needle. Like even Mike Williams and the Chargers and all that stuff barely moves the needle. How much would Von Miller, if he was healthy, move the needle when you combine it with the offensive line, right? The Bills don't have that, obviously. So I'm sorry. But you've got still a pretty good defensive line that can create pressure. And as I tried to say on the show the other day, the offensive line doesn't show up maybe every single play, but key runs, getting into 2nd and long if you miss a block, and then when it does get into 3rd and long, just not giving Joe Burrow enough time. We've seen Cincinnati overcome it to a point, as in they won games, but it was not a very effective offense last year on their Super Bowl run, right? They had those rough games, including the divisional round against the Titans, where Burrow got sacked 9 times.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we saw last season that they are capable of overcoming a bad offensive line. Now, you can argue now that this line might even be worse than it was last season, but it's a lot of the same guys. Like, that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Last season showed that it's definitely capable of overcoming that, but it makes everything so much harder. Like, now Joe Burrow has to think about that pretty much every single play. They need to get the ball out of their hands quickly. It limits what they can do. It just makes it more difficult. On the other hand, though, Buffalo has not had the kind of pass rush that they had earlier in the season when Von Miller was there. When he was there, they had arguably the number 1 pass rush in the NFL. I think they were certainly earlier in the season, but I think it might have been until he went down. They were the number 1 team in the league in pressure rate. They were either 1 or 2 in terms of the lowest blitz rate in the league. They essentially relied on front 4 to get pressure, and they were getting pressure as much as anybody. Since he went down, both of those things have changed. They have been getting progressively less pressure, and they've had to increase the amount they blitz to try and offset that, and still hasn't done it.
Yeah, so I mean it's obviously going to be a major storyline. I think a lot of times we see the pass rush that is struggling. The antidote is a bad offensive line on the other side. So will Buffalo get pressure there? How will Joe Burrow handle pressure? But I mean, it's really, let's oversimplify this. It's Burrow versus Allen, man. I know they're not playing heads up. People hate when you do that. Heads up, quarterback versus quarterback. Who's going to play better in this game, given their circumstances? Josh Allen has been dealing with these turnovers or turnover-worthy plays all season. He's overcome them because he makes an incredible number of big-time throws. Last week, showing 7 big-time throws versus 3 turnover-worthy plays. You don't get much, crazier than that. At some point, you don't want him to throw the ball to the defense. Like, you don't need to have one to have the other, right? Some of the plays he's made, they weren't just aggressive plays. It's just like you just didn't see a linebacker. So don't do that. And then from a Burrow standpoint, so much of his greatness is, tight window throws. He's got, one of the highest completion percentages in tight window throws. And there's so many plays where you talked about the Chiefs, right? They get backed up. It's 3rd and long. the Bengals have a slew of these plays too, where it's like, oh, you got him to 3rd and 10. Well, Burrow's going to hit this. He's just going to hit an index card on Jamar Chase's hands in the end zone for a touchdown, or along the sideline for a first down. Those are fine margins, and I think that's what we're looking at in this game. Will Burrow make those tight window throws? Will Allen make those turnover-worthy plays that he's shown a lot of the season here?
The other thing that was key, sort of last year's run with the bad offensive line, Joe Burrow had one of the best seasons in the NFL under pressure. And that's one of the things that you have to commend the Bengals front office for in the offseason, was recognizing, and the Chargers did this as well when Justin Herbert had his first year, was recognizing that that is a really volatile, unstable metric. And you simply can't rely on a quarterback being superhuman against pressure every single year. So the only answer to that is make sure he's under less pressure and try and equalize the swings. So Cincinnati obviously went out and overhauled that offensive line. But the chances are Joe Burrow will not be as good under pressure as he was during that run. But is that offset by the fact that the Bills don't have the pass rush that they had earlier in the season? I ran the numbers and checked it out. Since Von Miller went down, Buffalo is actually below average in pressure rate. They were at 30%, as opposed to the Eagles, who were at 44.5 over that same period of time, leading the NFL. And the blitz rate for Buffalo has gone up 10 percentage points. They've gone from like 12% blitz rate to 22. So they're blitzing more often, and they're getting significantly less pressure. Basically, they have a much more inept pass rush than they did when Von Miller was there, which is huge for Cincinnati because they have 3 backups on the offensive line.
Which could completely look different this week because of Cincinnati. It might look different for Buffalo here. The little that we did get to see of that game, Joe Burrow looked great, man. I mean, he was the Bengals had some quick answers. I mean, Buffalo's defense in general, they've never been pure lockdown under Sean McDermott, but on the higher end, they're on the better end of defenses across the league, certainly. But from a pass game perspective, they just kind of, prevented big plays and did a really nice job of making life difficult for opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah,
it's a little more hit or miss now.
It's funny, though, how much the perception on Cincinnati has changed, in part because of that game.
Which game?
The Damar Hamlin game that got abandoned.
Yeah.
And obviously part of it is also that they've lost 3 offensive linemen in 3 weeks, which completely changes one unit, which is a pretty important one, right? But if you look at what their run-in has been, look at the teams that they've faced and beaten with that one game that got abandoned. But since middle of the season, they beat Pittsburgh on the road, they beat Tennessee on the road. Okay, those maybe aren't quite as impressive as they could have been. But then they beat Kansas City. They beat Cleveland comfortably. They beat the Bucs on the road. They beat the Patriots on the road. That game against Buffalo gets abandoned, but at the point it did, they were looking really good.
They were ready for the big game. They were ready for that stage.
Right. And then they beat Baltimore back-to-back, in 2 reasonably close games. Or one reasonably close game and one game that was against Anthony Brown. But if you put that game sort of back in the schedule and it actually ends up going the way it had for 18 plays, which is, meaningless. But if that continued through and you add a victory against Buffalo to that, you would be saying Cincinnati's the best team in the NFL. This is the team to fear. Forget Kansas City with their 1 seed. The Bengals are it. But you take that game out of it, all of a sudden the NFL in their infinite wisdom drops them down to the 3 seed. They have to go on the road to Buffalo. And in the course of since that, they've lost these 3 starters. And now you're like, man, all of a sudden we're 5.5-point dogs, and they're not seen I don't think in the same category.
Yeah, I mean, we highlighted that on the show a ton, that stretch. Did you? I forget which game you started with, but even the Titans game in Week 12 felt big at the time. I mean, they went through a huge stretch of some tough teams. Not every team was tough there, but they didn't lose. They haven't lost since was it Week 8 when they laid an egg against the Browns. Mm-hmm. And that's the point I wanted to make too. Zach Taylor as head coach, because we're short-sighted too. I think we focus on, did he go for the 4th down the right way? Is he running the ball too much? Remember, early Zach Taylor analysis was they're running too much and they're doing this and that. I think what I've most been impressed with Zach Taylor about as head coach is he's evolved when needed, right? There was a point last season where they handed the reins to Joe Burrow and said, hey, go win games. Go throw for 450 yards and be our guy. We're not going to only drop back 25 times and try to win with the run game. They've lost some tough games under Zach Taylor, in the Bengals. Everybody loses, but they always bounce back. I've been so impressed with how they've bounced back from just from sleepwalking through games that they should win. The Jets 2 years ago, Browns this year. And then the third one is in big games. The Bengals seem to bring their best in big games, even in the Super Bowl last year, right? Like, you couldn't ask for much better than what they brought to the table. It's just Aaron Donald was too good, right? The Rams were too good. Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford were too good. So I think we're going to see the Bengals' best, is what I'm saying, in this game in Buffalo.
Well, Burrow's never lost in January, right? Isn't that a thing? Like, dating back to, like, all of his career.
And Trevor Lawrence we forgot the Trevor Lawrence stat.
What's that?
He's never lost on Saturday.
Never lost on Saturday.
Ever.
Yeah.
Like, dating back to birth.
Right. Back to birth.
Yeah. High school Saturday, because they usually play on Friday.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had a Saturday game in there.
Did he?
In college, he only lost on Mondays.
Yeah.
National championship. And then last week.
Yeah.
Last 2 weeks.
I mean, I think the same idea with Joe Burrow. He's never lost in January.
Listen,
back to birth.
so if you trust the stats here, the Giants are going to win because the divisional round team that has lost the two always wins.
You trust the statistical malpractice.
You have to trust the statistical malpractice here. Giants are going to win, plus Daniel Jones, better quarterback since week 13. Jaguars are going to win because Trevor Lawrence never lost on a Saturday. Mahomes probably has a losing record on Saturday, going back to Texas Tech. Think about that.
That's true.
Right? And you've got Joe Burrow's never lost in January.
Yeah.
I can't wait till we have a stat for Niners-Cowboys that's going to determine the game.
Brock Purdy. There's definitely a stat for
Brock Purdy's never lost in the NFL. So that's
true. He's undefeated.
It's pretty straightforward here. That will never happen.
He just doesn't lose in the NFL.
Him and Jeff Saturday are kind of like the same guy, except when Jeff Saturday was 1-0, he lost the rest of his games. When Purdy was 1-0, he won the rest of his games.
Yeah.
Same guy.
Saturdays wasn't the Raiders game wasn't on a Saturday, right? Because that would have been perfect. If he only won on Saturday and then couldn't win on Sundays.
Trevor Lawrence owns Saturday, not Jeff.
Well,
we know this.
No, that was
this is why people tune in for
that was his second game, right? Because that was it. He was 1-0, and then he was going. Then the next game was the Vikings.
Then it was like Saturday on Saturday against the Vikings.
Yes, no, because the Vikings game was Thanksgiving, wasn't it?
No. That was the Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
I was Elf that
what?
day. It was Saturday.
You were?
Yeah, I was Elf. I was dressed up as Elf.
Just a random Saturday game.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had a Christmas party. I was dressed up as Elf watching the game. That's what I remember. It wasn't Thanksgiving. I didn't dress up as Elf on Thanksgiving.
That would have been silly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Ryan Nelson says 2 state championship games played on Saturday in high school. Trevor Lawrence won both.
Okay.
Mr. Saturday. The real Mr. Saturday.
Yeah.
So that's all I got. I mean, we don't have much else to add here.
Well, so the thing that you were bigging up Zach Taylor. The thing that I think is most impressive about him is that this offense has become an awful lot less predictable.
Yeah.
Like last season, the biggest issue was they just telegraphed what they were going to do by alignment, by how the personnel groups. Like everything about this offense was formulaic, and teams understood how to combat it. Now, that's why so much of last season was predicated simply on Burrow to Jamar Chase, because teams understood what they were doing, and generally they were able to combat it. But at some point, the excellence of 2 superstar players is just going to invalidate whatever defense you're dialing up, right? This season, they become a lot less predictable, and so everything else can function as well. It isn't just relying on Burrow and Chase being better than you. They can actually beat you with scheme as well.
Von Miller's still number 2 on the Bills in total pressures this year.
Really?
He hasn't played since, week 10 or 11, whatever it might
12,
be.
I think.
So you still need so I agree with you on the Bengals, right? Like even last week, it was Jamar Chase short passes instead of just outside vertical down the field stuff. They have answers to problems now. So I think that's part. So my point in all of that is I think the Bengals are going to bring their best. The Bills' best is still probably better than the Bengals, right? Because slightly, I mean, we're splitting hairs here, but Josh Allen's best, and this is like when I ranked him just above Joe Burrow in the playoffs, Josh Allen's best is probably the best in the league.
Yeah.
Of anybody.
But they're now in this really weird, they have this tightrope to walk between, we've seen in the past that when Josh Allen takes over games, and in the playoffs, when he takes over games and there are things he does that you simply can't combat. Like he can neutralize anything you want to do because at some point he's just a better athlete. He's stronger, bigger, faster, whatever. Like you can have everything dialed up perfectly. You can have the correct answer in terms of defensive play call, and then he's just going to jump over 2 players and get a first down anyway. You're like, well, what? Like there's nothing you can do about that. But if that's sort of like if you position it as like that's how Buffalo wins. When he does that, you can't stop it, and therefore they win the game. The flip side of that coin is what happened last week, and I know they won that game, but to what extent is like, well, this is all Josh Allen has to do this. And when Josh Allen has to do this, either he's unstoppable or you get plays where it's like, dude, just dial it back and settle down a little bit. Like, you don't need to do it all every play, you know? So last week with
but
this...
it's like a net win over time, right?
Yeah, but
it's still a net win.
But it also, in any given moment, exposes you to big mistakes, which can change the outcome of the game, right? So last week with this 17-yard average depth of target, like, is he going to come into this game still in that mode, like YOLOing it deep down the field for 20 yards per pop, like going, I need to do all this on my own. I'm carrying this offense on my shoulders. It's me to Diggs. To hell with everything else. Or are they going to come out with a little bit more like poise and let's just run an offense and see where we get to?
Yeah, it is unbelievable, that style of play last week. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it.
I mean,
that level of aggression at all times of the game, even in the fourth quarter when leading, didn't matter.
That looked like what would happen if you gave Ryan Fitzpatrick all of the physical tools in the world and just said, go play. Yes. Like, what would that look like? It would look like last week Josh Allen.
But my point is, it's a net win. And you know what? Here's the deal. Here's why that might work again this week. Do you trust the Bengals corners? Like all season, injuries, Chidobe Awuzie being hurt, and everything that they've had to deal with back there. I think they've made do, right? And they do a great job scheming it up. They do a great job adjusting in the second half. They have been able to make teams one-dimensional in certain games where DJ Reader's nonstop.
Second half adjustments are a myth. Peyton Manning said so.
Yeah, I heard that. That's true. I mean, yeah. But, yeah.
I think it's probably true for Peyton Manning. Like, Peyton Manning adjusted on the fly every snap.
But, like, I heard Kurt Warner be like, well, we did stuff. And like,
right, that's what I'm saying.
Everybody...
But think of the way Peyton Manning played the game. Like, his entire game was about adjustments snap to snap. Like, it's I'm doing this, now you're doing this, I'm going to combat it, audible, Omaha. Like, he was adjusting every single snap of the game. There are other players who are out there doing the more paint-by-numbers quarterback. Those guys will be adjusting at halftime.
But the point is, and then all the other players, Jeff Schwartz, he was like, that's my experience. But like, everybody was basically saying the same thing, which was teams adjusted all times during the game. You're not like, man, that was a tough drive. We'll talk about it at halftime, though. Yeah, we got the rest of the first and second quarter here, but we'll just wait till halftime, right? And the whole point he's trying to make is you don't wait till halftime, and you don't literally like draw new plays at halftime. That's what he's trying to say.
Right. But I would imagine that of anybody, Peyton Manning is going to be doing the least halftime adjusting of any player in human history.
Yeah, because his whole thing was having an answer to whatever's on the field. I get it. But there is something about like you've seen X number of things, and once you see X number of things, you know how to adjust, to X.
Yeah.
And the Bengals do a really good job of that. Okay. Maybe they adjust at halftime. Maybe they start in the second quarter. Maybe it's the middle of the third, but they do adjust. How can the Bengals with Cam Taylor-Britt, Eli Apple, who just got whooped last week, and these guys have all been battling injuries too off and on. Cam Taylor-Britt, Eli Apple, how are these guys going to hang with Bills receivers? I mean, for my point is Allen might want to play the same game as last week. DJ Reader, immovable object in the middle. You're probably not going to get much joy, as you would say, in the run game if you're the Bills. Like, it's all stacking up for another Josh Allen superhuman effort, or at least attempting that, which is, yeah, we're going to trust our receivers to win. I'm going to chuck it to them, and anytime we need a third down conversion, if it's short, I'm running maybe. If it's long, I might be running. I mean, Josh Allen's making the plays, because I don't think you're relying on Devin Singletary and James Cook a ton in this game.
No, I mean, so the other element, because all the attention is on Cincinnati's offensive line and the fact that they're down to bare bones and a bunch of backups and how that's going to go against Buffalo's pass rush, I think we're kind of skating over the exact opposite scenario, which is Cincinnati's defensive line is pretty good and Buffalo's offensive line is not. And that's kind of being ignored in this whole matchup. Like, the Bengals are able to bring multiple impact problem players to the table that I don't think Buffalo is anybody capable of blocking. Like, can they block Trey Hendrickson one-on-one on the outside? No. Can they block DJ Reader one-on-one on the inside? Well, nobody else has. Like, they have some real issue players that the Bills' offensive line, which has not been good this year, I don't think is tremendously well set up to stop.
I mean, I think it's not being we mention it every week, right? Because we view the Bills I mean, all of these teams as like, here are the juggernauts. What are the weaknesses that could come back to bite at some point? And we mentioned the Bills' offensive line all the way back to week 1. But it hasn't yet, right? The offense hasn't been less effective. It's only been less effective, not necessarily because Allen's under pressure. I guess last week it was. He was under pressure and fumbled. But it's not because he's like, under duress or anything like that. It's just, oh yeah, Josh made a bad decision. I don't think the offensive line's held them down this year. They've been fine. And it's the same offensive line. Can the Bengals have some success against them, rushing the pass or stopping the run? Absolutely.
Well, this is the weird thing about Allen is that he's got a very, very strange statistical profile this season where he's the number 1 graded quarterback under pressure and has been all year. Like is he still posting? At one point, he had a passer rating higher and over 100 when he was under pressure versus when he was not under pressure. Now it's down to 94 now for the entire season, which is still absurd. But the number 1 graded quarterback in the NFL under pressure. But his grading falls off a cliff when you force him beyond his first read. So those two things don't mesh normally, right? Like, you generally speaking, when you force a quarterback off his first read, a lot of his numbers are going to go down, in part because you're going to be under pressure a lot more in those situations, and quarterbacks play worse under pressure. What's happening here is if you can force Josh Allen off his first read, but have him still comfortable and not under pressure, that's when he's making a ton of mistakes. But actually, as soon as he's really under pressure, somehow he zones back in and makes an insane running play or fires a bullet to somebody and makes a good play. It's weird.
That's Josh Allen, man.
Weird.
I can't wait for this game. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be, I think we'll get the whole Josh Allen experience. You're going to get the Joe Cool Burrow experience where he's not as maniacal, but he has some of those plays in there too where he just decides he's going to run around and extend plays and see what happens. You've got Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, incredible playmakers on both sides. I think the offenses are both going to have success. And what are we still looking at? 30 degrees. And where's Siciliano? Cecilia, you listening to the show here? Drop some weather for me here. I just want something in the teens with some wind.
Okay.
I want some snowflakes.
Well, so I got good and bad news for you. Some of which doesn't seem to coincide together. It's 37 degrees apparently.
Weak.
3 mile-an-hour winds and snow.
Oh, I see some snow there.
Don't you need what temperatures does it need to get to before there's snow?
So that's a high, right? You're looking at the high.
I'm just looking at the number that it puts in front of me. It doesn't say high or low. It just says the number.
The number that you see is the high.
Okay.
The default is the high. So presumably there'll be temperatures lower than that.
Okay.
Cloudy, snow showers developing in the afternoon, which is when this game's being played. High near 35. 5 to 10 mile-an-hour winds. Chance of snow, 60%. Snow accumulations less than 1 inch. Yeah, that's kind of weak. That's weak. So we might get a little aesthetically pleasing snowflakes, but that's about it. That's it. All right, man. 5.5 points for Buffalo. Where are you going?
I'm going to lean Cincinnati, even though I hate.
As I'm typing it in.
Even though I hate their
We're going to agree.
line.
We're going to agree to
It's
all,
looking that
on
way.
all these.
It's disturbing.
Remember, if the Bills and Chiefs win, we don't get to have. There'll certainly be no snow for the AFC Championship.
Because it'll be in the Dome.
It's going to be in Atlanta, in the Dome, where nobody can buy Chick-fil-A, and we don't get an outdoor AFC Championship.